The Burning Holy Land, the reality of Israel's complex crisis. Hello, dear listeners. Today, I would like to discuss the complex and serious situation unfolding in the heart of the Middle East. This is the story of the unprecedented crisis that Israel is currently facing. As of 2025, Jerusalem can no longer be easily called a city of peace. In this land, where religion and ethnicity, geopolitics and economics are intricately intertwined, Israel is experiencing the most complex and serious crisis since its founding. Particularly since Israel launched a full-scale airstrike against Iran on June 13th, the entire Middle East has been swept into a whirlwind of war. In this program today, we will carefully examine the political chaos and military conflicts Israel currently faces, as well as the reality of diplomatic isolation and internal social division, and together explore where all these crises began. June 13th, a historic turning point. Let me start with the most shocking event. At 4 a.m. on June 13th, 2025, Israel launched a massive attack on major cities across Iran, including Tehran and nuclear military facilities. This attack was the largest strike against Iran since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. Israel's operation was codenamed the Rising Lion, derived from Balaam's prophecy in Numbers 23 of the Bible. This shows that it carried religious and symbolic meaning beyond a mere military operation. The Israeli military spokesman stated that Iran, beyond its known nuclear enrichment program, had a secret project aimed at acquiring nuclear weapons in the near future, and was planning to launch simultaneous attacks on Israel in coordination with Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran did not remain idle. Iran struck Tel Aviv, Haifa, Jerusalem, and other cities using about 100 drones and 150 ballistic missiles. Unlike the missile attacks in April and October 2024, this time, missiles directly hit Tel Aviv's city centre, causing greater damage than before. Even residents of Bat Yam near Tel Aviv, which suffered significant damage from Iran's missile attacks, strongly supported military response, calling it a battle for the nation's survival. This shows that Israeli citizens are accepting this war not as a simple military operation, but as a fight for survival. What's even more surprising is the United States' direct intervention. On June 22nd, 2025, the US bombed 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. US President Donald Trump announced that Iran's core nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and perfectly eliminated. Thus, the Israel-Iran conflict has expanded beyond a simple regional dispute into an international war with direct US involvement. This situation is becoming a turning point in the world order, not just a crisis limited to the Middle East region. Second war on 2 fronts. However, Israel's crisis did not begin with the June airstrike on Iran. Israel was already fighting simultaneously on multiple fronts. It can literally be described as war on the outside and civil strife on the inside. The Gaza war, which began with Hamas's surprise attack on October 7th, 2023, continues to this day, when Hamas launched large-scale rocket attacks and ground infiltration into southern Israel. It caused great shock to Israeli society. In response, the Israeli military launched comprehensive military operations in the Gaza Strip and continues to blockade the southern Gaza area of Rafah. The civilian casualties that occurred in this process exceed tens of thousands. The international community continues to send warnings about the humanitarian crisis, but the Israeli government has not stopped military operations, citing national security. The situation in the Gaza Strip is worsening day by day, becoming a factor that further increases international criticism. Tensions are also escalating at the northern Lebanese border. Hezbollah periodically launches missiles, and Israel responds with fire. This has resulted in thousands of residents from the northern Galilee region having to evacuate. The 2024 Israel-Hezbollah war dealt devastating blows to most pro-Iranian, anti-Israeli armed groups, including Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Aryan al-Usud, and the Houthis. While this was advantageous for Israel, it also became a factor that made direct confrontation with Iran unavoidable. Particularly decisive was the fall of Syria's Assad regime in 2024. Since anti-aircraft weapons deployed in Syria were destroyed by hostile forces, aerial refueling via Syrian airspace became easily possible. This became the important background that enabled Israel to conduct long-range airstrikes to Iranian mainland. Third, far-right government and popular discontent. Political divisions within Israel are deepening. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu currently faces unprecedented anti-government protests and opposition to judicial reform. This has developed beyond simple political opposition into a debate about Israel's fundamental values and identity. For Netanyahu, whose approval ratings are precarious, striking Iran, whose external influence has fallen to its lowest level in decades, was almost the only value shared by most anti-Netanyahu figures, making it a reliable way to shift the political situation. Indeed, support for Netanyahu temporarily rose within Israel after the Iran airstrike. The judicial reform promoted by Prime Minister Netanyahu is raising concerns about authoritarianism among many Israelis. This reform contains provisions to limit the Supreme Court's authority and strengthen government power, drawing criticism for potentially undermining the principle of separation of powers, which is the foundation of democracy. Moreover, corruption allegations against Prime Minister Netanyahu personally continue to be raised. Already indicted on multiple charges of bribery and breach of trust, his promotion of judicial reform while these charges are pending has led many to view this as an attempt to influence his own trial. In this situation, cracks are appearing even within the Israeli military. Reserve officers and some active duty soldiers have declared they will refuse military service in opposition to judicial reform. This is a very serious problem for a country like Israel that faces constant security threats. Another source of internal conflict is religion-related issues. Conflicts between ultra-Orthodox Jews and the secular middle class within Israel are intensifying. Particularly serious are conflicts surrounding military service. Traditionally, ultra-Orthodox Jews have been exempted from military service for religious study reasons. However, in the current war situation, while ordinary citizens are being sent to battlefields, the ultra-Orthodox continue to avoid military service, leading to growing social anger. This has become a factor undermining fairness and solidarity in Israeli society. Fourth, distance from America, international criticism. Another serious problem Israel faces is diplomatic isolation. The relationship with the United States, its traditional ally, is showing complex aspects. The Trump administration is taking the position of avoiding direct intervention while completing preparations for military intervention regarding this situation. The US supports Israel's airstrike on Iran while simultaneously showing a complex stance of trying to minimize its own direct involvement. Democratic lawmakers, centered around criticism of starting a war with Iran based solely on presidential decision, without congressional approval, believe this constitutes grounds for presidential impeachment. Furthermore, some Republican lawmakers with isolationist tendencies also oppose the invasion of Iran. This shows that opinions on Middle East intervention are divided even within the United States. In the past, the US almost always exercised veto power, or voted against UN resolutions criticizing Israel. Recently, however, there are increasing cases of abstaining or not voting against at all. This is a very shocking change for Israel. Public opinion within the US is also changing. Particularly among young people and democratic supporters, critical views of Israel are strengthening. Protests condemning Israel's Gaza attacks continue on university campuses, and some lawmakers are demanding an end to military support for Israel. Internationally, Israel's position is becoming increasingly narrow. As of 2025, the International Criminal Court has officially begun investigating Israeli political and military leaders for war crimes. This is becoming a factor that further deepens Israel's diplomatic isolation and increases the possibility of economic sanctions. The European Union is also taking an increasingly critical stance toward Israel. Some European countries have already suspended arms exports to Israel, and discussions about economic sanctions are underway. V. Economic shadows. The Israeli economy is also facing a serious crisis. The ongoing war, political instability, and international isolation are working together to negatively affect the entire economy. News of Israel's airstrike on Iran has caused international oil prices to surge. On the 13th, the $1 exchange rate rose more than 16 won during trading, reaching 1,371 won. The national credit rating has been downgraded, and foreign capital has massively flowed out. Israel's startup-centered economy is facing a structural crisis. The second quarter 2025 growth rate recorded negative 1.3%. The most noticeable change is the sharp decrease in foreign investment. Given the characteristics of Israel's economy, which was concentrated in startups and high-tech sectors, this outflow of investment capital is causing very serious damage. Israel has been called a startup nation, with many innovative technology companies. It has produced world-class companies in various fields, including cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. However, due to the current unstable situation, many companies are relocating overseas or failing to receive investment. The direct economic costs of war are also significant. Military operation costs, productivity decline due to reserve mobilization, and economic activity suspension due to northern region residents' evacuation are all working together. Moreover, changes in the global economic environment are also working unfavorably for Israel. Amid de-dollarization movements centered on BRICS countries and weakening US hegemony trends, Israel faces crisis without reducing dollar dependence. This is causing import price increases and worsening people's livelihoods. On news of Israel-Iran conflict, Brent crude temporarily surged 13% during trading, but settled around $78 per barrel. WTI also jumped 8% during trading, based on July contracts, exceeding $73. The labor market is also in a difficult situation. Many reserves have been mobilized due to war, reducing the economically active population, and job creation is sluggish due to unstable conditions. Particularly, youth unemployment rates are significantly increasing, becoming a factor of social unrest. Sixth, Iran's nuclear weapon completion and new balance. Among the crises Israel faces, the most fundamental and long-term threat is Iran's nuclear weapons issue. The direct cause of the June 13th airstrike was also Iran's nuclear weapons development. According to international intelligence agencies' analysis, Iran appears to have already exceeded 90% uranium enrichment. This has nearly reached the level needed for nuclear weapon manufacturing, and technically, nuclear weapons could be completed within a few months. This is precisely why Israel judged it could no longer wait and launched a preemptive attack. Nuclear negotiations between the US and Iran are also expected to face inevitable delays. Iran also abruptly cancelled the originally scheduled sixth nuclear negotiation with the US Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei, stated, "Nuclear weapons are a means of survival, and Israel's attack proved their justification to us." This suggests Iran may accelerate nuclear weapons development further. Moreover, Iran has continuously expanded its influence in the region through proxy forces. Lebanon's Hezbollah, Syria's pro-Iranian militias, Yemen's Houthi rebels, and Gaza's Hamas formed the so-called axis of resistance surrounding Israel. However, the situation changed dramatically after 2024. Hamas and Hezbollah suffered major damage, and particularly with Syria's Assad regime collapse, Iran's proxy network was significantly weakened. This provided Israel with an opportunity to directly attack Iranian mainland. Nevertheless, Iran is gaining confidence under the protection of Russia and China. Particularly, Russia's provision of advanced air defense systems to Iran is making additional Israeli attacks difficult. Seventh diplomatic failure with Saudi Arabia. Israel has been pursuing improved relations with Arab countries to resolve its isolation in the Middle East region. Particularly, normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia was one of Israel's important diplomatic goals. After normalizing relations with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco through the Abraham Accords, Israel seemed to be making significant progress in improving relations with Saudi Arabia. The US also actively supported these moves. However, the situation completely changed after the Gaza war began. Saudi Arabia strongly criticized the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and withdrew from discussions on normalizing relations with Israel. This became a factor that deepened Israel's isolation in the Middle East. Moreover, Saudi Arabia and several other Arab countries are considering BRICS membership or strengthening economic cooperation with China, showing movements to break away from the existing US-centered order. This is a very unfavorable geopolitical change for Israel. Eighth, Trump's dilemma and changing world order. This conflict has put US President Donald Trump's diplomatic leadership on the chopping block. Initially, President Trump had declared he would reorganize the international order with a policy of not intervening in any international conflicts. Nevertheless, while the Russia-Ukraine war, which President Trump said he would end in one day after taking office, shows no signs of ending, the new problem of Israel-Iran conflict has been added. The US is currently managing a triple front: the Ukraine war, Indo-Pacific strategy to contain China, and Middle East instability. This is dispersing America's strategic resources and creating situations that demand more burden from allies. There are claims that Iran will blockade the Strait of Hormuz to induce international oil price increases and economic burden, pressuring countries worldwide to stop Israel's airstrikes on Iran. This blockade would be particularly fatal for the Trump administration in the US. While all of the Trump administration's economic policies tend to raise prices, the fact that inflation hasn't risen in 2025 is largely due to low oil prices. If oil prices start exceeding $100 to $120, the Trump administration would have to abandon all economic policies or accept inflation. The Holy Land, choices in the flames. Thus, Israel currently stands in a triple crisis of war outside, civil strife inside, and diplomatic isolation globally. The June 13th Iran airstrike was the decisive moment that triggered all these crises at once. From a military perspective, Israel's Iran airstrike is evaluated as successful in the short term. It dealt significant damage to Iran's nuclear facilities and could delay nuclear weapons development by at least several years. However, Israel also suffered considerable damage from Iran's retaliatory attacks. More importantly, this war could completely change the military balance in the Middle East region. Iran is likely to move closer to Russia and China instead of abandoning nuclear weapons development. This means the Middle East region could become a new battleground between the US and China-Russia camps. Politically, the Netanyahu government succeeded in shifting the political situation in the short term. Israeli public support rose after the Iran airstrike, and controversies surrounding judicial reform temporarily subsided. However, if the war becomes prolonged, internal conflicts are likely to resurface. Particularly, divisions within Israeli society remain unresolved. Conflicts between religious and secular groups, unfairness controversies surrounding military service, and confrontations over democratic values all remain. Economically, Israel is also at a critical crossroads. Beyond direct costs from war, foreign investment decreases, corporate overseas relocations, and tourism industry collapse are working together. Moreover, the possibility of international sanctions cannot be ruled out. Internationally, Israel's position has become more difficult. While it still receives US support, isolation is deepening in Europe and other regions. Particularly, ICC investigations and various critical resolutions in international organizations are pressuring Israel. What paths can Israel choose in this situation? The first is to continue maintaining current hardline policies, completely blocking Iran's nuclear weapons development and eliminating surrounding threat forces. However, this is a difficult path that requires enduring long-term war and international isolation. The second is seeking peaceful solutions at an appropriate time, resolving nuclear issues through direct dialogue with Iran or international mediation, and improving relations with Palestinians. However, such policy shifts seem difficult in the current political situation. The third is prioritizing internal unity, settling judicial reform controversies, and forming a national unity government to jointly respond to external crises. However, this requires major decisions from political leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu. The fourth is seeking new alliance relationships. In situations where relationships with traditional Western allies are becoming difficult, strengthening cooperation with new partners like India, Japan, and South Korea. Whatever choice is made, Israel seems bound to undergo major changes. The June 13th Iran airstrike has become a historic turning point that determines Israel's future beyond a simple military operation. Moreover, the results of these choices are not just Israel's problem. They will significantly impact the stability of the entire Middle East region, the global economy, and international order. Oil price increases, global supply chain disruptions, and new confrontational structures between the US and China are all connected. Above all, this place is also a holy site for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. What choices will be made in this land that has served as a crossroads of religion and civilization for thousands of years, and what results those choices will bring, no one can yet know. What is certain is that Israel stands at a historic crossroads. The June war has ended, but the ripple effects it brought are just beginning. The crisis unfolding in this land, called the land of faith and prophecy, has important meaning for all humanity beyond a simple regional conflict. Whether to show possibilities for peace and coexistence, or continue the vicious cycle of conflict and division, now depends on the wisdom and courage of Israel, neighboring countries, and the international community. Particularly, the next choices of US President Trump, Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei, and Prime Minister Netanyahu will determine the fate of the Middle East and the world. In today's program, we examine together the reality of Israel's complex crisis and the recent war with Iran. Though it's a complex and difficult situation, accurately understanding this reality will be the first step toward creating a better future. Thank you to all who listened, and I pray that peace will come to the Middle East region as soon as possible.